Ladies, gentlemen, and tarnished of all ages, there are plenty of new weapons that have sort of taken the Elden Ring community by storm since the release of the DLC, but few anywhere quite as notable as the Bloodfiend's Arm Colossal Weapon. This thing naturally scales with arcane, has high natural bleed buildup, and can also then further be set to blood affinity to scale to pretty ridiculous amounts of bleed buildup per swing. Not to mention the unique charged heavy attack that it has just applies bonus bleed buildup for fun and can be chained to a second one too. There are plenty of ways to build around this weapon, but today we're going to be taking it into a slightly more unique direction. Rather than just using it as a big whacking stick, we'll use it as a big guarding stick as well. Combined with the new deflecting hardtear from the DLC, we spontaneous guard incoming attacks to return damage with significantly damage boosted guard counters, all of which applying loads of bleed buildup as well, and importantly dealing an absolutely insane amount of poise damage and generating staggers extremely quickly on any boss as a result. We fully build into and around this for something just a bit more complex that just only using, charged heavy attacks with this thing, though we do still, of course, use charged heavy attacks if a guard counter isn't available in the moment, as they're just really damn strong anyways. That said, let's dive into every part that makes this build function and where to get it, with a caveat that I will be assuming that you either have or know where to get all components from the base game. Starting up then, the Bloodfiend's Arm weapon itself, and this comes from one of the Bloodfiends located all the way up at the top of the Prophet Town area near the cliffside terminus Site of Grace over here. Just climb up and kill the pack of Bloodfiends, and this weapon will then drop for you. Then we have your Ash of War, and on this you want Shriek of Sorrow, which leans into your slightly more interesting setup that we have here. This is a weapon buff that applies to your weapon on use, and it gives you a damage buff for 40 seconds that is a larger increase depending on how low your health is, at maximum being just under 30%, the maximum bonus being given when you are just under 30% health. To get this for yourself then, from the small private altar Site of Grace in Ballarat Tower, head out up the stairs and then take a right, then follow this path towards a large tree in an open courtyard, and then the Ash of War will be on the opposite side of the tree from where you enter. Then in your second right hand slot you want the cane sword. Technically any straight sword will do the job for this, but this is the lowest weight one by half a unit, and that does actually genuinely matter for your stats. On this we are putting a seppuku, which lets us trigger bleeds before a boss fight, but also lets us lower our own health down to 30% to activate Shriek of Sorrow's maximum buff without any actual danger. As the neat part of the buff is that it does not actually get lower if you heal up after applying it, it snapshots itself at whatever bonus that it was when it applied. Then in your left hand you want the Dragon Communion Sacred Seal. It just scales very well with Arcane, which is our main stat for this, and so you can use any incantations that you would like for more variety and adaptability, but the base build just uses this to apply buffs. Then for your armor, then you want the White Mask Helmet for a 10% boost to all damage that you deal for 20 seconds after a bleed occurs nearby. Then 3 pieces of the new Rakshasa armor set. These raise all damage that you deal by 2% per piece that you have on, at the cost of just having lower damage negation than an average piece of its weight. You can wear fashion armor instead if you want, but this is the min-max choice for an extra 6% damage, and it comes from the boss of the Eastern Nameless Mausoleum, located right over here down by the Recluse River downstream Site of Grace. Past that then we have your Talismans, the curved sword talisman for a 20% boost to guard counter damage, directly synergizing with our Wondrous last tier choice of course. Then we have the two-handed sword talisman for a 15% boost to damage done while two-handing a weapon, which we are, and that's also why we're able to guard, and this comes from the top of the Temple Town Ruins area in the lower area east of the Shadow Altus region. This one has a bit of a tough path to actually point out and point you to, so I'll just let it actually play out fully for you. In the next slot then we have the Lord of Blood's Exaltation Talisman for a further 20% boost to all damage done for 20 seconds after a bleed happens nearby. Then finally we have the Blade of Mercy Talisman, which gives you 20% bonus damage for 20 seconds after getting a critical hit, and this build applies so much stagger that this is pretty much the best offensive fit for our final slot, and it is also available very early on in the DLC at the top of the Scorched Ruins in the first area. That said, in some fights with enemies with longer combos you may instead want the Great Shield Talisman for a 20% reduction to the stamina cost of guarding attacks. The deflecting hardtear does a lot of heavy lifting in that regard, but it doesn't make guarding every attack in the game free. Some of them will take stamina, so this helps out for longer strings of incoming attacks and, increases the actual margin of error that you can get away with. Moving on, then we have your spells in this build too, and the only really required ones are Golden Vow for a 15% boost to all damage done and a 10% boost to damage negation for 80 seconds after casting, and then Flame Grant Me Strength for a 20% boost to physical and fire damage for 30 seconds after casting. Though if you can be bothered to farm for them, the Sacred Bloody Flesh consumable item that is new to the DLC is better than Flame Grant Me Strength for any build that applies bleed, and it fills the same buff slot, and as we apply bleeds regularly and quickly, it is just better. Then finally we have Bestial Vitality, a health regen buff that gives us 5 health per second, which isn't a whole lot, but it does help actually offset our health draining and chip damage as well, and this actually lasts for 2 minutes after casting, which is a pretty long period. Finally then, for actual equipables, we have your Wondrous Flask of Physic upgrades, and of course these are the deflecting hardtear, which we've talked about a fair bit already, enabling the spontaneous guard function for powerful guard counters and just generally strong defensive ability when two-handing a larger weapon. This comes from the Furnace Golem walking around the very first starting area just northwest of the Scorched Ruins Site of Grace. Then in your other slot we have the Bloodsucking Cracked Tear for a 20% boost to all damage done at the cost of a health drain debuff while it's active, and while this is excellent for blitzing your way through a fight against an enemy with lower health, if a fight is going to take you longer than about 40 seconds, it is generally not worth using this because of the negative of the health loss here, and instead, if so, I would recommend either the Poise Damage Increasing tier, the Stone Barb tier, or just the standard Opaline Hard tier for general damage negation increase. With all that covered, let's just go over how to spend your levels within this build. 60 Vigor, of course, to avoid being one-shot too easily, 31 Endurance to equip all of our gear, 25 Faith to use our buffs, and then you want to hit 50 Arcane as the first proper Arcane soft cap for physical damage gain on the weapon, and then 28 Strength to let you wield the weapon in one hand if necessary. Past that, you want to put further levels into Strength until it reaches around level 40, and if you have even further levels to spend past that, if you're higher level than 150, you would then do Arcane up to about 80, and then just Strength right up until 66 maximum as we're two-handing anyways. Finally then, let's talk about just how to actually play the build and how to buff up yourself before starting a boss fight. Start by using Bestial Vigor, then Seppuku yourself 3 times in a row to put yourself right around 40% health. Then you'll be slightly ticking up over that from the Bestial Vigor. Then you want to apply Golden Vow, drink an FP Flask, and then also your Wondrous Physic, then use Flame Grant Me Strength, and then Seppuku one final time to put you to properly low health. Switch to Bloodfiend's Arm, two-handed, use Shriek of Sorrow, drink another FP Flask, and then put yourself back to full health, and then walk into the boss room. Enjoy being significantly boosted for a minimum of 30 seconds, especially if you get your bleed proc pretty quickly on, which you generally just will, and this is enough to kill most bosses, if not put a large chunk into ones that are a bit on the healthier side. As far as actually using this then, in general combat, I went a bit hard on hunting for guard counters in this footage to really just show off how good they are with spontaneous guard, but realistically, a lot of the attacks that I block, you should probably just roll through so you get a larger opening, and then you can do a charged heavy attack. Treat the spontaneous guard as a defensive mechanism and take advantage of it for guard counters whenever the opening is appropriate, but don't be afraid to just throw out a charged heavy attack when an opening presents itself, because they really just are very, very strong, even regardless of what our actual focus is within the build. That just about does it for today then, everyone. A full guide to building the Bloodfiend's guard counter setup for yourself, a fun variation of playstyle that still takes advantage of the menace that this weapon is to apply just lots of bleed procs and then massive damage on top of it, all while providing the unmatched comfort of playing around the deflecting hardtear once you get used to playing with it. Honestly, it's one of my favorite ways to play the game now that it exists. I hope you've enjoyed this and hopefully enjoy using this build for yourself if you choose to too. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.